Those of you who have come to the webinars, I think will find a lot of this information familiar. But a big part of what we do at Unbounded is trying to figure out new ways of talking about the same sort of big picture opportunities. And something that we have started to gravitate towards more is how can we show the value of micropayments, highly efficient payments? And I think that SaaS, software as a service, provides a really great framework to understand how better payments can really transform the way that commerce occurs on the internet. So SaaS has been a big topic for a while now. SaaS, if anyone doesn't know, stands for software as a service. And what SaaS is when a company, whether they do it themselves or they have someone else do it for them, hosts software for their consumers instead of just selling the software. So in the past, you might have bought software on a disk, installed it on your computer, run it on your own computer, and that's not happening very much anymore. Instead, all of your apps are cloud-based. You can access them from any device, and it's really a much better user experience, which is why it has become so prevalent. And this prevalence is both in a B2B and a B2C context. Some of the big names that you'll know from the B2B side, Salesforce, Zoom. Obviously, a lot of people use Zoom now, not in a business context, DocuSign. And on the B2C side, and I think this is where maybe micropayments are even more of an opportunity. You have apps like Gmail, Netflix, Spotify, and you can recognize a SaaS product by the fact that you don't have to be on your phone, your laptop, or any specific device to access it. You can access it from any internet connected device, more or less, as long as you have the right login. I think most people know about SaaS, so I'll just get through this. SaaS is really big. A lot of people make a lot of money with SaaS products, and that trend doesn't seem to be reversing. Now, one of the things that we like to point out as sort of a context for where do micropayments fit in are the costs of SaaS. SaaS products, unlike a software product that you would install on your computer, this introduces a recurring cost to the software provider. No longer is it simply I design the software, I create something that's downloadable, something that you can buy at the store, you install it on your machine, and you're good to go. Now, as people use my software products, I have this recurring cost, and I have to find a new type of business model to accommodate these recurring costs. If I were to charge upfront for a service like Netflix, with all the costs I'm going to incur from a user through the duration of their use of a service like Netflix, what is that one-time license cost? Is it $500? Is it $1,000? Who knows? But it would have to be extremely high. And so that's just not even a possibility. And so what we get much more commonly are things like advertisements, freemium models, and subscriptions. And while these methods have been sufficient to allow SaaS to really thrive based on its superiority from a user experience standpoint, what we've observed, kind of coming from the mindset of seeing the possibility for highly efficient payments and micropayments to change the way that these products work, we see a lot of the problems with the ad-based payment methods, freemium payment methods, and subscription-based payment methods. Ads especially, I think that the costs ultimately outweigh the benefits of having ads. Not at all. There's a time and a place for advertisements, but as a way of being a primary or even a large revenue source for most internet applications, I think that this is a very, very counterproductive method to choose. Ads are chosen because they're free for the consumer, or at least they're thought to be free. And because of the friction and the high cost of having to pull out your credit card to sign up for a service, a lot of times the only option to monetize a user is through advertisements. Now, ads, they are really a very poor way of monetizing your user base. A lot of times, like on YouTube, for example, you're going to see less than $1 paid to a content producer per hour of ads watched. So in terms of how are you valuing your customers' time, you're placing an extremely low value on your customers' time. And that's a big part of why so many of these SaaS services, they're always trying to push their consumers towards subscriptions, because it's a much better exchange where the ads, there's just not enough money, and it creates extreme perverse incentives. And those incentives are really what have led to this state that we find ourselves in, which I think is well described as surveillance capitalism, where companies are incentivized to harvest as much data as possible about their users, really primarily for the purpose of making advertisements as efficient as possible. How much lower would the rate at which a business or a content creator would get for showing ads be if we weren't spying on each other to the degree that we are? Probably it would be far less than $1 per hour of ads watched. And what allows that number to get as high as it is, even though it is still so low, is the fact that companies know everything about you and are able to target you extremely precisely. And so not only is this an ineffective way of monetizing for businesses, for content creators, but it creates this perverse incentive that leads to companies wanting to spy on their consumers as much as possible. And I would say one other, and perhaps not very well understood or not very well quantified cost of ads, is that it really creates a content culture of appealing to the lowest common denominator. There's a whole industry of clickbait where essentially the goal is to get people to click on something that just seems interesting, like, what are the 10 cutest animals, and show them as many ads as possible. And while this is sort of a caricature of the incentive, it points to the fact that clicks are more important than value in the ad-based economy. And so companies optimize for clicks, and to get more clicks, that leads to sensational headlines, things of that nature. And in a economy that was more oriented around actually serving value to the users rather than just getting clicks to show ads, I think that we would have much, much better content of all types. Subscriptions are better than ads, undoubtedly, but they have their own issues, especially when you're talking from a consumer perspective. They become unmanageable quickly for consumers. You can look at the trend that Netflix started, and now if you want to watch every show that you might hear about, you're going to have 10 plus subscriptions just for your TV and movies, let alone all the other subscriptions that people are juggling for work or for other types of content, music, things related to shopping, video games. And it's not a sustainable solution, as the number of services that your typical consumer is going to want to subscribe to continues to increase. And because of the benefits of SaaS from a consumer standpoint, there's not necessarily any end in sight in terms of how many services that are SaaS-based are you going to want to use. Now, subscriptions also pose a significant issue to businesses in that it creates an extremely high barrier to entry. And what sort of exacerbates this is the fact that the actual payment is extremely high friction. Having to pull out your credit card and enter your information is very tedious, and it also is expensive. Any credit card transaction is going to cost at least 30 cents plus some percentage of the total value of the transaction. And as a result of this high friction, companies end up paying extremely high costs, pouring money into free tiers in order to try and get customers to finally pull out their credit card and subscribe and become a recurring source of revenue. So we think that the technology that's really going to change this is blockchain. And we are specifically, as many of you know, focused on Bitcoin SV for its prodigious ability to provide highly efficient payments. We think high transaction fees on legacy payment methods like credit cards, they have prevented alternative SaaS monetization models from emerging. Whereas with a new tool like Bitcoin in the form of Bitcoin SV, we see these hyper-efficient payments being able to create models which work much better in the SaaS economy. And one thing that we've mentioned before on webinars that's worth saying again is that the internet was always designed for these types of payments. I think it's the 402 HTTP code, although I might be wrong. But there was always a code designed into the browser for making a payment very similar to a Bitcoin payment. It's just the technology to actually deliver it took a very long time to arrive. And so that vision for the internet of being able to make these seamless payments in a browser setting never ended up actually emerging until now. So what we first see is what we like to call the pay-as-you-go revolution. And so what efficient payments enable are being able to pay as you go, pay for what you use when you use it. This can be paying for an article at a time. This little hypothetical picture, this is not a real picture. This is just a hypothetical. This is an article that you might be interested in from the LA Times. And why can't you just pay 10 cents or 25 cents with one click to read an article? It seems like a product that should already be here, but it's not. Instead, what you're going to see is either a free article with ads, or you're going to see a paywall. And oftentimes that paywall is something like pay $1 this month to subscribe. And then what they don't tell you is that you're going to be paying $40 a month if you don't cancel. And so I think that these companies are leaving a lot of money on the table by not having a way for their users to just pay by the article as they use it. And it's especially true for millennials and Gen Z, where there's not the same kind of loyalty to a specific publication where you want to read the LA Times cover to cover. People are just Googling articles and clicking the first thing that comes up. And a lot of times that leads them to many, many different publications. And so this is a much better model for that type of usage. What we love about pay-as-you-go is, first of all, you totally reduce or even eliminate the need for advertisements, which means that's a lot more money for companies because users are willing to pay a lot more for an hour of great content than $1, which is the amount that they would be able to pay if they spent that whole hour watching ads. And it's also a much lower barrier to entry compared to subscriptions. Instead of pulling out your credit card, paying $1, and then having to mark on your calendar when you're going to cancel your subscription, and then hopefully you remember, or else you just get charged a lot for the one article. Being able to pay once, it's much less sort of mental headache. And with some of the UX improvements that we're seeing in the Bitcoin space and beyond, this is going to be a very, very seamless process. So, like I mentioned, these UX improvements, they really can compound the benefits to both consumers and businesses of a pay-as-you-go model. One of these UX improvements are one-click payments, which is something that we see very commonly in the Bitcoin space. Solutions like Apple Pay and Google Pay, they're kind of showing the trajectory here, getting away from having to put in your information at every site and instead having a single account that you can use across multiple different platforms to pay. And beyond a one-click payment, we even think that zero-click payments, automated payments, payments that get automatically triggered in the background are something that's coming as well. And that would work extremely well for something like a pay by the minute type of service. If you could pay once a minute or once an hour as you watch Netflix, and maybe pay a tenth of a cent per minute or 1 cent per minute, it would be much, much easier to watch all of your favorite shows than having to have a subscription on every site. Another massive benefit is privacy. These types of payments, especially with Bitcoin, because they're non-reversible, they really remove the need to collect consumer information in most cases. Because take the example of a Google search, which we had on the prior slide. Being able to pay a cent for a Google search so that Google doesn't have to spy on you, first of all, because they don't have to sell you ads. And second of all, when you actually make that payment for a Google search with a credit card, what if I pay that cent, I make my search, Google can't take the search back. I could just go with my credit card and cancel the payment. And is it really worth it for Google to come after me and try and dispute that, no, I actually did process this search for this person and recoup that 1 cent. It's not a practical solution. Whereas with something like Bitcoin, you can actually make a non-reversible payment. You can use Bitcoin to make reversible payments, but the real innovation is the ability to make non-reversible payments over the internet. And that means that the companies that are selling you products potentially for as little as a cent, they don't have to collect all of your information in order to sell you that product, like a Google search. And this can even get a step further, and this is kind of getting past, just the basic payments. But in the future, I really see a Bitcoin-based source of identity that allows for consumers to do things like even prove that they're of a certain age without doing something like revealing their birth date or revealing more specific information about themselves. And that would be extremely valuable for a lot of industries which have a very hard time policing that their users are actually of the age that they need to be. So some of the pay-as-you-go pioneers. On the left, we have, this is maybe not the best logo to learn the name of this company, but we have Handcash, which is an Unbounded Capital portfolio company. And they really, I think, are a great prototype for the type of kind of like an Apple Pay equivalent, but using BSV, where Handcash you can actually use to log into an application and make payments inside of that application with one click, or even automated in the background. And there's a lot of applications using Handcash where they're making use of payments below $1 or even below a cent. And in some cases, that cent payment is even being chopped up into lots of different pieces and sent to multiple people at once. And so it's extremely powerful compared to something like an Apple Pay or a Google Pay, which, even though it's a great UX advancement, they're still utilizing legacy payment systems like credit cards. And I'll just highlight one other of these, which is BitPing, which is an enterprise tool. It's actually a monitoring service. And the way that they operate is they have nodes across the world where you will download BitPing software. And then in the background, your computer does checks to make sure that websites across the world are still online. Making sure, for example, that Google is still up and running in Venezuela or in Uruguay or in Canada. And they have computers all across the world who are able to make these health checks for websites. And the way that they pay their users to do that is they actually pay per ping, and often amounts as low as 1/100th of a cent or even less per ping. And so I personally have made several dollars, not huge money, but it's something. Having BitPing installed on my computer for the last 6 months or so, just performing these health checks in the background, I don't have to do anything. I'm just getting paid one ping at a time for my computer's resources. And of course, I want to share a bit more about what we're doing at Nifty Jigs, which is the company that I started. And I have a reduced role now at Unbounded Capital, as I'm spending most of my time building with these tools that we spend so much time talking about, including Handcash, which I just mentioned on the last slide. Nifty Jigs is focused on making it easy for games and applications to access highly efficient payments and also scalable NFTs. And I'm not going to say anything about the NFTs. We had an NFT webinar, and we've got enough to talk about with the payments. But one of the things that Nifty Jigs is really focused on is utilizing pay-as-you-go methods to change games, to change the way that gamers are able to access gaming content. And this allows us to do a lot of really great things in the gaming space. One of these is we have 0 ads. So on the games that we've created with our platform, we've never ever shown an advertisement. So we don't have any incentive to spy on our users in order to get data on them, to show them better and better ads. And we don't waste our users' time showing them ads. We just let them access great content. Another thing that pay-as-you-go does is it really lowers the barrier to entry for games. A lot of games today, you either have to pay a large amount upfront like $60 or $70 for a new Nintendo title, for example. Or you have to watch ads, or in some cases, you even have to have a subscription. And a lot of games are going more towards that subscription model. With a micropayment model, being able to pay 5 cents, 10 cents, 25 cents to try a game, or per level, something like that, it actually allows gamers to try far, far more games. And that's something that we're really taking advantage of in terms of being able to take advantage of things like interoperability. I'll wait and talk about that in a second. Another really powerful thing about pay-as-you-go in the context of games are being able to take advantage of new commercial models for third-party contributors. So we have a game called DuroDogs, where you raise a digital pet dog, which is an NFT. And something that we can do utilizing a pay-as-you-go model is we can actually allow other games to utilize those NFT pet dogs to create other games for our users. And that's something that's already happening. And what we can do is we can say, hey, you charge our users 5 cents a play, something like that, and they can take their dogs into your game and pay you money right away. There's extremely low barrier to entry. You don't have to show ads or anything like that. You can just plug straight into our user base. But we can actually charge maybe 1 cent out of that 5 cents. And so every time someone pays you 5 cents, you pay us 1 cent for use of our DuroDogs IP. And that is a model that scales really well across many, many different creators that might go into creating a single game. And it's a much better model for both creators of gaming IP, like DuroDogs, and also for game creators. The reason it's better for game creators is that they don't have to pay large licensing fees up front. They can just start paying for things once their consumers are paying them. And it's better for asset creators like a DuroDogs because we get a lot more upside where if we have to sell the DuroDogs IP up front, I don't know, what do we charge? 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. But if we can supply DuroDogs IP to a game that can get 1 billion plays, which a lot of popular games do, then that's huge upside to us as a creator of IP being used inside of a game. And I think that this is the type of solution that will help to scale to drive really large degrees of interoperability to create experiences like the metaverse, which is an extremely buzzy topic today, and I think rightly so. But with something like the metaverse, you're talking about potentially dozens or hundreds of creators contributing to an experience at any given point in time for a user. So how do you effectively pay everybody for their time in their creation? And I think that these types of pay-as-you-go instant payments and being able to split up a payment to multiple creators, that's a really promising way forward for these types of applications. So a quick summary, micropayments can solve problems of SaaS. They eliminate the need to use ads. They eliminate the need to drive people to subscriptions. And not only do they improve the products that we already have, but they can be used to create products that we've never seen before. And that's what we're trying to do in the gaming space with Nifty Jigs.
Thank you, Jack. Do we have any questions from those in the audience?
Yeah, I'll ask a question then. So, looking at this from the point of view of a user, does that mean when we'll be logging on to the internet, we log on to a some kind of wallet or something with a wallet, which has got our ID information there, and then we access whatever service we want to access via that wallet. Is that what it's going to look like?
Yeah, instead of the current model now where to use almost any online service with money, you have to have an account with them. You're going to basically have your one kind of internet account, and then that will interface with all the other different products and services and businesses. At least that's what we think is likely to happen if something like Bitcoin, reached a critical mass.
And so every time you pay for something, that's a new key pair.
It can be, and I think that's how it's most likely to look kind of over the long term.
And so does that mean you would have a master key registered with the government? And if you needed to provide some kind of rundown of what you'd done, you could then use that master key to give them a copy of your transactions.
That's definitely technically possible to do. I hope they don't require that, at least in the US, but definitely possible to do. Hoping maybe things like that are more required for, say, just businesses rather than private individuals. And
like in the event of a court order, not that we anticipate that to happen to us.
Yeah, having that record for yourself, I think, would be hugely valuable. I don't think you'd want to expose that like kind of by default to the government, or at least, that wouldn't be my preference, but kind of having an evidence trail. Whenever I'm watching like some true crime thing, I'm always thinking, man, like, usually it's a couple decades ago, and all the evidence we have now from security cameras or our phone or our key fob logging into our building, but it's kind of dispersed across the internet. So having that for yourself, kind of trace back up to your identity master key, I think would be very valuable if kept private. But then if you needed to present that somewhere, or for more practical reasons, just having a record of all of your transactions to easily pay taxes or to make tax preparation just really a software product would be very valuable for users, but also for the government as well.
You would also need buy-in from these businesses to have it actually be really effective, because the beauty of what we're describing is, instead of it's one wallet that pays a bunch of different people, basically every single transaction will be from a different wallet to another business's wallet. Like today on BSV, you can pay someone $10 with 1,000 different wallets that effectively obfuscate the transaction, so that if you're a business, your competitors don't know what you're doing. Where yes, you can show the history of your transactions, and you can say, my software that I used for the wallet noted that it was this business, but you really have to kind of get the other business to opt in to then sharing that, hey, I proved that this was my transaction, to have it be, a sure thing for government. So even if you are sharing that information with governments, depending on what the standards that are adopted, which I think we hope, and for a lot of reasons think are likely to be kind of this, each payment is done with lots of different transactions, kind of how Satoshi outlined originally, becomes the standard, such that this doesn't become this kind of totalitarian tool used by governments.
And when you say 1,000 different wallets, you mean 1,000 different master keys, and is that to
not necessarily?
Or I think 1,000 different addresses. I think.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
1,000, yeah. And what sort of wallets are on the cutting edge of that at the moment? Splitting things up. Is anyone looking at Benford's law to be used to do that yet?
I can't necessarily answer the second part of the question. In terms of who's on the cutting edge, it's definitely Handcash. For example, Handcash for a long time has, every time you make a payment, you're using a different set of keys, so that all of your payments can't be sort of associated together without you as the sort of initiator of saying, I want to associate these payments in this context. And we're doing the same thing with them for NFTs, where I can own 1,000 NFTs, but I own them with 1,000 different key pairs. And so this is really cool, because it allows us to separate the identity from like the on-chain data layer. So someone could potentially, like with a game like DuroDogs, go look at the blockchain and see every single DuroDog that's ever been created. And this has a lot of value from like an application perspective. But what would be bad is if they could also see, all right, who owns every single one of these DuroDogs? And they can't do that. And so even though you can see, like transparently, I can see, okay, there's exactly as many DuroDogs as there are supposed to be, I can't see who owns what. And I can't even see if one account owns half, or if there's a more even distribution. And that's a little different than Ethereum, especially where on like Ethereum, typically people operate from a single account, and therefore everything that you own however much Ethereum you have, whatever NFTs you have, that's all associated with one account. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can tell that it's you, but they know that there's someone who, let's say, owns 100 different DGen apes, and then that person might become like quite a big target for a hack, for example.
Hey, Jack, can you explain the women in BSV from a development content perspective? Because I want to tease that out a little bit better because I don't think that was clear.
So in the sense that like they were able to create NFTs for the game?
And the payment waterfall side.
Right. So we did sort of a pilot with Duro Dogs where we had a popular podcast in the BSV world called The Women of BSV. They created sort of a whole clothing line for the dogs. One of the main things that people do in the game today is they acquire NFTs, they can buy them, they can actually discover them for free, and they can use them to dress their dog. And so what the Women of BSV did is they created a bunch of items, and we listed 3 of them in the game. And whenever someone made a purchase and bought one of those items, some of the money went to us, and some of the money went directly to the Women of BSV. And we never had to sort of hold the money and then send it to them, which is a big advantage. The money just went straight from the user in 2 directions with 1 click. And so that's definitely a model that we plan to use liberally into the future.
So you just mentioned actually one of the things that is really interesting with the smart contract. You can also sublease or lease or interact with parts of content, whatever that content might be, like embedded videos, and maybe I can repost it, and depending on what my reach is on my network, I actually get some attribution back for that, for sharing that, right? If it actually gets viewed. And so there's like many mechanisms that are very interesting. That is a mechanism I find very difficult right now to understand the monetization effect of that, because this application is so new. But looking at the mechanics of it, right now you have this paywall and you have the subscription, and like you say, from a end user perspective, it's not a great experience. On the other hand, maybe there are waves you're going through, and that gives some plannability for income for the current way of employment, because you have journalists, for example, and that like to get paid, and not sometimes, but want to have an income. And so I think there's some structural issues around that. And then you look at the cost for advertisement, where you sometimes have, like $10 to $20 per ad that you actually get paid on the homepage, or in the case of Washington Post, it's more in the $80 to $90. And that's a lot of 0.0001 cents. Okay. I mean, that's a lot of articles, right? In order to make up for this one ad, right, spending, or maybe it's per mil. So, in all fairness, but still the discrepancy between that is so huge, and the surrounding ecosystems are just so disjointed right now. Do you think this is only going to work for new applications, new greenfield things, new kind of user experiences, and not the old school?
No, I think it'll definitely work for old school things as well. The same way that, perhaps the new school things will be the first to adopt it. We're kind of seeing parallels to the adoption of the internet with the adoption of micropayments here, where gaming companies were quite early to adopting the internet, adopting most new technologies. And when we look at who are the users, who are the customers of Handcash and other portfolio companies of ours, we're seeing it largely gaming companies today. And when we first started investing into the infrastructure for the future of commerce on the internet, we did not anticipate that it would be gaming. But now that we're seeing that, we're kind of adjusting the way we think about our investments and supporting our portfolio companies accordingly. So yes, gaming is first. And some of these companies are maybe more forward-looking old school, some are completely new school. But like with any technology that provides a significant benefit to the status quo, it might take a while, but I think eventually we see that, get adopted because of just how much more, revenue and profit it can drive to business.
Yeah, and the whole industry is changing. So your example of Washington Post, we don't need a building with a sign Washington Post on it that they pay for electricity and desks and brick and all of that. You just need the writers. And so we're already seeing that now with Substack. I mean, with Joe Rogan on Spotify, you could make the argument that Joe Rogan is more powerful than some major news outlets today. And it's because of the content that he has. So same with YouTube. I mean, as the price to store data on the chain goes down, I think the content creators having the ability to sort of charge what they want to charge per article or per feed or per unit of content will grow. So like we don't need a Spotify in the middle anymore. And I think this will affect advertising industry. We think it'll affect the gaming industry. You don't need to go work at Electronic Arts if you're a content creator and you're drawing these images. You could just draw them on your own. And then why not get paid a nickel for every game that uses your content as opposed to working for one company? So we just see this as a way of blowing out all kinds of industries: search, advertising, commerce, YouTube, video, you name it.
Well, thanks.
I think a fun recent example, kind of paralleling Substack to something like the Wall Street Journal, is The Office, which is probably one of the most popular shows of all time, was taken off of Netflix so that NBC could basically use it to create their own subscription service. And it was sort of like the bait to get everybody into Peacock, their new service. But the question that interests me is, how much money would The Office make just being at theoffice.com? And you can just go to theoffice.com and watch any Office episode. They don't need Netflix. They don't need Peacock, except for they do today, because, I mean, yeah, The Office is probably someone that can get you to subscribe specifically to The Office. But today it's more valuable for someone like Peacock to pay The Office whatever amount of money they pay and use it to bootstrap their broader kind of content platform. But I think in a world where everyone had the ability to make a 25-cent payment with one click for an episode, that The Office could make a lot more money being at theoffice.com, controlling their own content, and not having to be bundled up in some sort of larger subscription where they're kind of carrying the weight for everybody else.
Yeah, I think just to add one thing to that, in that world, I think users probably aren't navigating to theoffice.com, even though now that's available. So then I think Netflix, Amazon Prime, all these services really become curation for selecting the best shows for you, pointing you to The Office. So you can kind of have this like single app experience, but you're not losing shows or gaining shows. You kind of have access to everything. And The Office could just give Netflix a percentage if you got directed to it through Netflix. And then there's a ton of competition on the user experience side, which I think is really good for users, good for show creators. Everyone kind of wins in that model.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I actually prefer when a show is on Netflix versus any other streaming service, because I just think their UI is better. So would they, right now they're obviously an extremely successful company, but would they still be successful? I think they would if they were sort of a universal UI to every show, because they're the best UI, versus being the best UI, but only having access to a certain limited set of content.
Yeah, there might be a smaller business there, but probably have much higher margins.
Yeah, it's a fun example. It's one of the early examples that got me really interested in the space of an industry that could be improved. I used to work in the film industry, and you can extend it further also, where what does Steve Carell get per episode of The Office? So he could be paid in real time, where, you know, Jack is streaming an episode, it's 25 cents. Everyone kind of gets paid out their ownership percentage. The way that the industry handles it now is crazy, where you'll be getting a check like 6 months later. People are getting checks for 5 cents if they have a really small ownership of something marginally popular. It's an accounting nightmare, and logistically, it's just terrible. So the industry would be, I think every sector from user all the way down to the creators would just benefit hugely.
Zach, hi, how are you? Hi, I joined late. I'm sorry, I was on another call, but I would just like to know kind of how your general business is going and where you are in the fundraising process, and just let us know what's going on at Unbounded.
Thanks, Francesca. So things are going well here. Our first fund, the Opportunity Fund, is now closed to new investors, and we're raising our second fund, a traditional venture capital fund. The target is $50 million. We're capping that at 70, regardless of how well fundraising goes and the interest. Today, we have like 20 million of that soft circled, and we're hoping to do our first close in April. And yeah, actually, just as of right before here, we hopefully have the final version of the legal docs or something very close to it. So yeah, I've just been talking to people, sharing things, and thanks for the question. Happy to share more information with you, or I'll just proactively do that with kind of our latest materials on that fund. Okay, thanks everyone for attending today. We were at roughly a monthly cadence last year, kind of dropped off for a little bit, hoping to get back to something like that soon. We'll be sending recordings of this that you are free to share with others. And until next time, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, can I say one more thing?
Yes, you can.
So I recommend, if you want to learn more about this, go to handcash.io or get the Handcash app. If you are on iOS, maybe wait 2 days. And the reason I say wait 2 days is not because they don't already have an iOS app, they do. But today they released fiat on-ramps, so the ability to get as little as $5 of BSV with a credit card inside of the app. That's already live on browser and on Android, and it'll be here on iOS. Oh, it's live on iOS now, Dave says. All right, never mind, don't wait. And Handcash has an app store. So if you go and you get Handcash, you get $5 of BSV. You're going to be able to get pretty far in terms of trying out the various apps that are connected to Handcash. There's a lot of fun ones. I'll highlight two that we made, which are Duradogs. You can get started playing for free, and BSV 2048, which is a fun puzzle game, and you can experience some interesting gamification of micropayments through that app.